Have you ever wondered what turns a piece of land into a nation? I mean, it's not just about lines on a map or government, right? There's something more to it. It turns out there's kind of a recipe, and today we're going to uncover that recipe. We'll be looking at the nationalist fires that swept through 19th century Europe and comparing them to the struggle for independence in early 20th century India. Let's get into it.
So let's start with the big question. What actually makes a group of people a nation? Is it speaking the same language, having a common enemy? Or is it just a really powerful idea that everyone buys into? Well, it's a mix of all those things, really. But at its heart, a nation is a shared story. It's a story people tell themselves about who they are, where they've come from, and, this is the crucial part, where they're all going together.
Okay, so we're going to break this whole recipe down into 5 key parts. First up, we'll look at how the very idea of a nation even gets started. Then we'll explore the spark that ignites a rebellion. After that, the leaders and ideas that fan the flames. Fourth, how you forge a common identity with symbols and stories. And finally, we'll get into the complicated part, how nationalism can be a double-edged sword.
All right, part 1, the idea. See, long before any flags are waved or anthems are sung, a nation has to be imagined. It starts as a dream, a vision of what a country could be. Take a look at this. It's an incredible vision from 1848 by a French artist, Frédéric Soriot. He imagined a world where people weren't just subjects of a king, but citizens of their own nations, each with its own flag, all marching in this huge procession toward the Statue of Liberty. You have to remember, at a time of powerful empires and absolute monarchs, this was a completely radical, almost utopian dream. It just perfectly captured this new spirit of nationalism that was in the air.
And that dream? It had a very specific, tangible goal, the nation-state. This is the key. It's where the nation, that's the people with their shared story and identity, fuses with the state, their very own independent government controlling their own territory. This was the ultimate prize that everybody was fighting for.
So, how does a dream like that turn into a full-blown revolution? Well, that brings us to our second ingredient, the spark. And what you're about to see is that whether we're talking about 19th century Europe or 20th century India, the things that light the fuse are remarkably similar.
What's so fascinating here is just how much these situations overlap. I mean, in Europe, you've got weavers in a place called Silesia rising up because contractors just slash their wages to nothing. In India, you have farmers facing insane taxes to pay for a war happening thousands of miles away. In both places, you've got these new ideas about freedom and rights colliding with the harsh reality of an oppressive government and just economic desperation. That is a volatile mix.
And in Europe, this wasn't just a one-time thing. It was more like a slow-motion chain reaction. After Napoleon was defeated in 1815, the old kings and emperors tried to put the genie back in the bottle, to turn back the clock. But it was too late. The idea of the nation was out there. Revolutions just kept erupting in 1830 and then again in 1848, with people all over the continent demanding constitutions and a unified nation.
Meanwhile, you jump half a world away, and World War I acts as this massive accelerator for Indian nationalism. The British Empire needed Indian soldiers, Indian money, Indian resources. So what did that mean for people on the ground? It meant forced recruitment from villages, taxes that went through the roof, and devastating food shortages. All of a sudden, these separate communities were united by a shared suffering, all thanks to a foreign power.
And then you have moments. Moments so brutal they become these unforgettable turning points. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre in 1919 was one of those moments. The British general, Dyer, later said his goal was to create a sense of terror, to force people into submission. But he did the exact opposite. He created a generation of revolutionaries and showed the entire world the brutal reality of British rule.
Okay, so anger and hardship can definitely fuel a rebellion, but they can't build a nation. For that, you need architects, leaders with powerful, unifying ideas who can take all that raw anger and shape it into something new and lasting.
In 19th century Europe, this was basically a huge clash between two big ideas. On one side, you had the liberals. They were inspired by the French Revolution and championed things like individual freedom, constitutions, and government by the people. On the other side, you had the conservatives. They were fighting to keep the old world alive, the absolute power of kings, the authority of the church, and all the traditional social hierarchies. The entire future of Europe was basically forged in this conflict.
And out of all this chaos, these incredible figures emerged. In Germany, you had the ultimate political chess master, Otto von Bismarck. In Italy, you had the passionate revolutionary soul, Giuseppe Mazzini. And then, arriving in India in 1915, you have Mahatma Gandhi, who brought with him a completely radical, game-changing idea for how you fight an empire.
So what was this radical idea? It was satyagraha. Now this isn't passive resistance, it was active. Gandhi called it truth force. He truly believed that if your cause was just, you didn't need violence. The goal wasn't to crush your enemy, but to actually awaken their conscience, to make them see the truth of their own injustice. In a world full of brute force, this was a profound moral weapon.
And this is Satyagraha in action, and it is just brilliant. The Salt March of 1930. The British had a total monopoly on salt, and they taxed it, something every single person needed to live. So Gandhi walked 240 miles to the sea to illegally make his own. Think about it. It was a simple, nonviolent act that every Indian, rich or poor, could understand. It was political theater of the highest order, and it made the British Empire look both cruel and ridiculous to the entire world.
So, leaders and ideas are absolutely vital. But a nation also needs a soul. It needs a shared identity that people can see and hear and feel. And that brings us to our fourth ingredient, the power of symbols.
So how do you make millions of people feel this deep, personal love for an abstract concept like Germany or India? Well, you give it a human face. In Germany, she was Germania, this heroic, strong figure. In India, she was Bharat Mata, or Mother India, a calm, divine, spiritual figure. These images transformed a political struggle into something emotional, something almost like family.
And the tools they used to build this identity? They were surprisingly universal. The French pushed one national language to try and erase all the regional differences. In both Europe and India, intellectuals and artists went around collecting folk songs and old fairy tales. They weren't just preserving art. They were building the idea of a shared ancient past. And of course, the flag. The tricolor in both France and later in India, it became the simplest, most powerful symbol of that new unity.
But, and this is a huge but, the very same force that can unite a people can also tear them and the world apart. So for our final section, we've got to look at nationalism's double-edged sword.
And this is where it gets really complicated. Nationalism worked in places like Germany and Italy. It united people with a shared language and culture into powerful new states. But in a place like the Balkans, which was incredibly diverse, that same impulse was poison. When every single ethnic group, Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, all demanded their own nation-state on lands that overlapped, it turned the whole region into a powder keg. This is the dark side. The moment you define an us, you automatically create a them, and that tension is what ignited World War I. And even within a single independence movement, that idea of unity was incredibly fragile. This is what's left after the Chowri Chowra incident in 1922, a protest that was supposed to be nonviolent turned deadly. For Gandhi, this was a disaster. It violated the core principle of Satyagraha. So he did something unbelievable. He called off the entire national movement. It just shows how incredibly hard it was to keep millions of people united, not just in purpose, but in action.
And these cracks were showing up everywhere. Some leaders got tired of the constant protests and wanted to fight the system from the inside. Leaders from the Dalit community, like Dr. Ambedkar, worried that a Hindu-majority India wouldn't protect their rights, and they demanded separate political representation. And maybe most tragically, the fragile unity between Hindu and Muslim groups started to crumble, setting the stage for future conflict. The idea of a single Indian identity was constantly being challenged from within.
Which brings us all the way back to our final question. We've seen how nationalism can build powerful nations, but also trigger horrific conflicts. So what is it, really? Is it some fundamental human need to belong, or is it a political tool that always inevitably creates division? The recipe for creating a nation seems pretty clear, but whether the final result is a unifying loaf or a destructive bomb, well, that outcome is anything but certain.